The fluorescent bulb above the cash register at Murphy's Cafe flickered intermittently, casting uneven shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Outside, the desert wind carried dust across Route 40, where the occasional semi-truck rumbled past the small Arizona town of Cedar Falls. Behind the counter, Kate Morrison methodically cleaned coffee cups, her movements precise and economical, habits ingrained from years of military service that civilian life hadn't managed to erase. At 36, Kate carried herself with the quiet alertness of someone who had seen too much. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and though she wore the simple uniform of a cafe worker, there was something unmistakably disciplined about her posture. The customers who frequented Murphy's had learned to respect the former Army medic, even if they didn't fully understand the shadows that sometimes crossed her green eyes. The afternoon rush had died down, leaving only a few regulars scattered throughout the weathered booths. Near the window, elderly Frank Torres worked his way through his daily crossword puzzle, occasionally glancing up to watch the desert landscape shimmer in the heat. At the counter, 12-year-old Danny Reeves hunched over his algebra homework, a chocolate milkshake growing warm beside his textbook. Kate had grown fond of the boy over the past few months. Danny was the son of Staff Sergeant Maria Reeves, currently deployed in Syria, and his father worked double shifts at the copper mine to make ends meet. The cafe had become Danny's unofficial after-school sanctuary, a safe place to wait while his father finished work. Kate understood the weight of military deployment on families. She'd carried that burden herself during her tours in Afghanistan. The bell above the door chimed, and Kate looked up to see 4 young men enter, their swagger immediately changing the atmosphere in the small cafe. She recognized them as part of what the locals called the Desert Rats, led by Tyler Blackwood, whose father owned half the commercial real estate in Cedar Falls. They weren't technically a gang, but their harassment of local families had become increasingly bold as their parents' influence grew. Tyler approached the counter, his expensive boots clicking against the floor. His 3 companions, Brad, Kyle, and Mason, spread out behind him in a formation that spoke of practiced intimidation. Kate had dealt with their type before, privileged kids who had never faced real consequences for their actions. 4 coffees, Tyler said, not bothering to make eye contact, and maybe some information about where the soldier boy does his homework these days. Kate's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd noticed the Desert Rat's increasing interest in Danny, their cruel comments about his deployed mother, their accidental encounters that left the boy shaken and defensive. Today felt different, though, more focused, more threatening. "Coffee coming up," Kate replied evenly, reaching for the pot. "But I don't discuss my customers with anyone." Tyler's smile was cold. "See, that's where you're wrong. My father pretty much runs this town, which means what I want to know, I get to know." Behind Tyler, Danny had gone very still, his pencil frozen above his homework. Kate caught his eye in the mirror behind the counter and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Stay calm," the gesture said. "I've got this." As Kate poured the coffee, she became aware of another presence in the cafe. A man she'd noticed several times over the past weeks had taken a seat at the far end of the counter. He was in his 50s, with steel-grey hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years on the road. His leather vest bore patches she recognized, Nomad's Motorcycle Club, a group with a reputation for independence and loyalty to their own code. The man, who'd introduced himself simply as Ranger during his previous visits, sipped his coffee and watched the interaction with the steady gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating threats. Kate had served enough veterans to recognize the signs, the careful positioning, the alert stillness, the way his eyes tracked every movement in the room. Tyler accepted his coffee but made no move to leave. Instead, he leaned against the counter, deliberately invading Kate's space. "You know, I've been thinking about this place," he said, his voice carrying just loud enough for the other patrons to hear. "Prime real estate, right on the highway. Could be worth a lot more if the right people owned it. The threat was barely veiled. Kate had heard similar comments before, knew that the Blackwood family's real estate empire had grown through exactly this kind of pressure. They would identify vulnerable properties, apply various forms of intimidation, then swoop in with below-market offers that desperate owners eventually accepted. "I'm sure Mrs. Murphy appreciates your interest," Kate replied, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Now, if there's nothing else, you boys should probably head home. School night and all." Tyler's companions snickered at what they took for weakness, but Kate caught the flash of genuine anger in Tyler's eyes. He wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by someone he viewed as beneath his social status. "Actually, there is something else," Tyler said, turning his attention toward Danny. "Hey, soldier boy, your mom's still playing war in the sandbox." Danny's face flushed, but he kept his eyes on his homework. Kate stepped between them, her movement fluid but clearly protective. "Time to go," she said, her voice carrying a new edge that made Tyler's friends shift uncomfortably. "We're paying customers," Tyler insisted, though his confidence seemed to waver slightly. "We have every right to be here." And I have every right to refuse service," Kate countered, "which I'm doing now." The standoff stretched taut, filled with the kind of tension that could snap in either direction. Frank Torres cleared his throat loudly from his booth, while Ranger's hand moved casually to rest on the counter, ready to intervene if necessary. Tyler looked around the cafe, gauging his support, and finding none. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice tight with humiliated fury. "My father's going to hear about this." "I'm sure he will," Kate replied calmly. After the desert rats left, their expensive motorcycles roaring unnecessarily loud as they departed, Kate poured fresh coffee for Danny and settled onto the stool beside him. "You okay, kid?" Danny nodded, though his hands were still trembling slightly as he gripped his pencil. "They've been bothering me at school too. Taking my lunch money, calling mom names, saying stuff about soldiers." Kate felt the familiar anger rise in her chest, the same protective fury that had driven her to shield wounded Marines from enemy fire in Kandahar. "How long has this been going on?" "Couple of months," Danny admitted, "but it's getting worse. Tyler keeps saying his dad's going to make sure all the military families leave town, that we don't belong here." The pattern was depressingly familiar. Kate had seen it in other towns, the way certain families used economic pressure and social intimidation to reshape communities according to their vision. Military families, with their deployments and modest incomes, were often easy targets. "Danny," Kate said gently, "you need to tell your father about this." "He's got enough problems," Danny replied quickly, working all those extra shifts to keep up with the bills while Mom's gone. "I don't want to make things worse." Kate understood the impulse to protect family members from additional worry, but she also knew the cost of suffering in silence. Before she could respond, Ranger approached from the other end of the counter. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Couldn't help but overhear. Mind if I offer some perspective?" Kate studied him carefully. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was something reassuring about Ranger's presence, a sense of controlled strength rather than threat. "Go ahead," she said. Ranger looked directly at Danny. "Son, I served 2 tours in Vietnam. Came home to find folks who'd rather forget we existed. But you know what I learned. Sometimes the people who understand your sacrifice best aren't the ones you'd expect." He gestured toward his vest. "The nomads, we look out for our own. And that includes the families of those still serving. Your mother's putting her life on the line for this country. That makes you family, whether you wear our colors or not." Danny looked up, confusion and hope warring in his young face. "But people say bikers are dangerous?" Ranger finished with a slight smile. We can be, when the situation calls for it, but danger and justice aren't mutually exclusive, son. Kate found herself reassessing the weathered biker. His words carried the weight of genuine conviction, and his manner with Danny was protective rather than patronizing. The Blackwood kid and his friends, Ranger continued, they're used to getting their way through intimidation. Sometimes it takes a different kind of intimidation to make them reconsider their choices. I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me, Danny said quickly. Nobody's going to get hurt, Kate assured him, though she wasn't entirely certain that was a promise she could keep. That evening, as Kate closed the cafe, she noticed Ranger waiting by his motorcycle in the parking lot. The machine was a testament to both power and careful maintenance, a Harley-Davidson that gleamed despite its obvious age. Figured I should introduce myself properly, he said as she approached. Marcus Reed, but everyone's called me Ranger since my army days. First Cav, 69 to 71 inches. Kate shook his offered hand. Kate Morrison, Army medic, 3 deployments in Afghanistan. Ranger nodded approvingly. Figured you were military. You move like someone who's seen combat. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 veterans recognizing something familiar in each other. Finally, Kate spoke. Those boys aren't going to leave Danny alone. Their harassment has been escalating for weeks. No, they won't, Ranger agreed. Tyler Blackwood's got his father's arrogance and his generation's sense of entitlement. Bad combination. And Carl Blackwood. Worse. He's been systematically pushing out families he deems undesirable for years. Military families, immigrants, anyone who doesn't fit his vision of what Cedar Falls should be. Kate had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach clench with familiar anger. She'd fought for her country, sacrificed years of her life, only to come home and find the very families she'd served alongside being treated as disposable. What can be done about it? Ranger's smile was grim. Well, the nomads have been keeping an eye on the situation. We've got brothers from 3 states who served their country. Seeing military kids harassed doesn't sit well with us. The implication was clear, though unspoken. Kate found herself at a crossroads. She could continue trying to handle the situation alone, or she could accept help from an unexpected ally. I don't want vigilante justice, she said finally. Neither do we, Ranger replied. But sometimes peaceful resistance requires a show of force. Sometimes bullies need to understand that their targets aren't as isolated as they thought. 2 days later, Kate's worst fears materialized. Danny arrived at the cafe with a black eye and torn shirt, trying to hide his injuries as he slumped into his usual spot at the counter. What happened? Kate asked, keeping her voice gentle, despite the fury building inside her. It's nothing, Danny mumbled, not meeting her eyes. Just fell off my bike. Kate had treated enough combat injuries to recognize the signs of a beating. The bruising pattern on Danny's face spoke of deliberate violence, not an accident. Danny, she said quietly, I need you to tell me the truth. The boy's composure cracked, tears streaming down his bruised cheek. They cornered me after school. Tyler and his friends. They said their parents are going to make sure Dad loses his job, that we'll have to leave town. Then Tyler hit me and told me to give Mom a message when she calls, that Cedar Falls doesn't want her kind anymore. Kate felt the familiar cold rage that had sustained her through firefights in Afghanistan. These weren't enemy combatants, they were children terrorizing another child. But the effect was the same, innocent people being hurt by those with power and no conscience. She gently cleaned Danny's wounds with the first aid kit she kept behind the counter, her medic training taking over. As she worked, she made a decision that would change everything. Danny, I need you to call your father. Tell him you're staying here with me until he can pick you up. But no arguments. This has gone too far. As Danny made the call, Kate stepped outside and dialed the number Ranger had given her. He answered on the second ring. "It escalated," she said without preamble. "Danny's been beaten. I need your help." There was a pause, then the sound of an engine starting. "On my way." "And Kate, the cavalry's riding tonight." By evening, Cedar Falls had never seen anything like it. 37 motorcycles arrived in perfect formation, their riders moving with military precision as they took positions throughout the small town. They weren't causing trouble. They weren't even particularly loud, but their presence was unmistakable. The nomads had come, and they brought with them a sense of controlled menace that had Carl Blackwood making frantic phone calls from his office. Sheriff Martinez found herself in the unprecedented position of having to explain to the mayor why 37 bikers weren't technically breaking any laws by existing in public spaces. At the cafe, Kate watched through the window as two nomads took up subtle positions in the parking lot. They weren't there to intimidate customers, but their message was clear. Murphy's Cafe was under protection. Danny's father, Luis Reeves, arrived within the hour. A quiet man, worn down by long shifts and worry, he took one look at his son's injuries, and something hardened in his expression. "I should have handled this sooner," he said, guilt heavy in his voice. "It's not your fault," Kate replied, "but it ends now." Sheriff Martinez arrived as they were discussing Danny's injuries. Carmen Martinez was a 20-year veteran of law enforcement, a woman who'd worked her way up through determination and competence in a male-dominated field. She examined Danny's bruises with professional detachment, though Kate caught the anger flickering in her dark eyes. "This is the third incident I've documented involving the desert rats and military families," Martinez said, "but getting witnesses to testify has been difficult." "Why?" Kate asked, though she suspected the answer. "The Blackwood family has a lot of influence in this town. People are afraid of economic retaliation." It was the same story Kate had heard in other communities, wealth and influence creating a shield that protected the guilty while silencing their victims. "What if you had witnesses who weren't afraid?" Kate asked. Martinez looked up sharply. "You mean the bikers outside?" "I mean people who've seen enough injustice to recognize it when it happens again." That night, Kate couldn't sleep. She walked the perimeter of her small apartment, checking locks and windows with the automatic vigilance of someone who'd lived under threat before. Around midnight, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over, soldier girl. My dad owns this town." She deleted the message and made another decision. If Tyler Blackwood wanted a war, she was qualified to give him one. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Murphy's Cafe. A woman in an expensive suit strode through the door, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum with obvious disdain. Kate recognized her from local newspaper photos. Rebecca Blackwood, Carl's wife and Tyler's mother. "You must be the waitress," Rebecca said, her voice dripping with condescension, "the one who's been causing trouble for my family." Kate continued wiping down the counter, not bothering to look up. "Mrs. Blackwood, coffee?" "I didn't come here for coffee," Rebecca snapped. "I came to deliver a message. My husband owns the building that houses this cafe. Our family controls the water rights, the electrical permits, even the garbage collection contracts. Cross us, and you'll find out just how quickly things can become difficult." Now Kate did look up, meeting Rebecca's gaze with steady green eyes. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. Military families like the Reeves, they don't belong in Cedar Falls. This town is meant for people with vision, with resources, not for transients who drain our services while contributing nothing." The casual cruelty of the statement took Kate's breath away. She'd heard similar sentiments from politicians and pundits, but hearing it delivered so matter-of-factly by someone who'd never risked anything for her country struck like a physical blow. "Maria Reeves is risking her life in Syria," Kate said quietly. "Her husband works 60-hour weeks to support their family." "How exactly are they draining your services?" Rebecca waved dismissively. "Military families use more social services. Their children require additional support in schools. Their medical needs are complicated by combat trauma. It's simple economics." "It's simple cruelty," Kate corrected. Rebecca's expression hardened. "You have 24 hours to convince the biker gang to leave town. After that, my husband's patience will be exhausted, and the consequences will be severe." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Ms. Morrison, we know about your service record, PTSD, anger management issues, early discharge due to psychological instability. Perhaps Sheriff Martinez should be made aware of the unstable veteran working in her jurisdiction. The lies hit like shrapnel, designed to wound and discredit. Kate had been honorably discharged after completing her 3rd deployment, her service record exemplary. But she knew how easily truth could be twisted, especially when wielded by people with resources and connections. After Rebecca left, Kate stood alone in the empty cafe, fury and helplessness warring in her chest. She'd faced enemy fire, had held dying soldiers while mortars fell around her position, but this felt different, more personal, more insidious. Her phone rang. Ranger's gravelly voice was calm but urgent. "Kate, we need to talk. Something's happening." They met at a truck stop outside town, away from prying eyes and listening ears. Ranger brought 2 other nomads with him, an older black man called Prophet, who'd served in Desert Storm, and a younger woman named Steele, whose military bearing was unmistakable despite her civilian clothes. "Carl Blackwood's making his move," Ranger said without preamble. "He's called in favors with the county commissioners, claiming we're a threat to public safety. They're talking about emergency powers to force us out." "Can they do that?" Kate asked. "Legally, it's questionable," Steele replied. Her voice carried the crisp authority of an officer. "Practically, if they control the local government, they can make our lives difficult enough to achieve the same result." Prophet leaned forward, his weathered hands folded on the table. "This isn't really about the bikers, Kate. We're just a convenient excuse. Blackwood's been planning this campaign against military families for months. Your stand at the cafe just gave him a public incident to exploit." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Kate had walked into a trap, her protective instincts used against the very people she'd tried to help. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We make our own move," Ranger said. "Tomorrow night, there's a city council meeting. Blackwood's expecting to ram through his emergency measures with a room full of his supporters. We're going to give him something unexpected instead." "Which is?" "The truth," Steele said simply. "Military families who've been afraid to speak up. Veterans who understand what's really at stake. Citizens who believe in justice over wealth." Kate felt a flicker of hope. "And if it doesn't work?" Ranger's smile was grim. "Then we remind Cedar Falls that some battles are worth fighting, regardless of the odds." The days leading up to the council meeting brought a steady stream of visitors to Murphy's Cafe. Veterans from across the county, drawn by word of mouth and social media posts, came to offer their support. Some were nomads, others belonged to different clubs or no club at all. What they shared was a common understanding of service and sacrifice. Kate found herself at the center of something larger than she'd anticipated. Her simple act of protecting Danny had become a symbol, a line in the sand that divided Cedar Falls between those who believed in justice and those who believed in power. The media attention was intense and unwelcome. Local news crews camped outside the cafe. National outlets picked up the story of military families under siege in small-town America. Kate avoided the cameras when possible, but she couldn't avoid the growing sense of responsibility that came with unwanted fame. 2 nights before the council meeting, Tyler Blackwood made his final mistake. Kate was closing the cafe late, having stayed to prepare statements for the upcoming hearing when she noticed Danny's bike still chained to the rack outside. The boy should have been home hours ago, and Luis wasn't answering his phone. Alarm bells rang in Kate's mind as she searched the empty cafe, then expanded her search to the parking lot and surrounding area. She was about to call Sheriff Martinez when she heard muffled sounds from behind the building. What she found made her blood freeze. Danny was cornered against the back wall by Tyler and 2 of his friends, the boy's face already showing fresh bruises. Tyler held something in his hand, a knife, Kate realized with combat-trained clarity. "Please," Danny was saying, his voice shaking, "I didn't do anything." "Your mom's kind don't belong here," Tyler snarled. "Time you learned that lesson permanently." Kate moved without conscious thought, muscle memory from countless combat situations taking over. She came up behind Tyler's companions silently, her approach masked by the desert wind. "Step away from him," she said, her voice carrying the authority of command. Tyler spun around, the knife still in his hand. His face was flushed with adrenaline and misplaced anger, his eyes wild with the kind of rage that came from too much privilege and too few consequences. "The soldier girl," he sneered. "Come to save your pet?" Kate positioned herself between Tyler and Danny, her body language shifting to the defensive stance that had kept her alive in Afghanistan. She was acutely aware of the knife, of Tyler's companions flanking her, of Danny's terrified breathing behind her. "Last chance," she said calmly. "Walk away now, and this stays between us." Tyler's laugh was high and unstable. "You don't get it, do you? My father owns this town. I can do whatever I want." He lunged forward with the knife, his attack clumsy but dangerous. Kate sidestepped smoothly, her training taking over as she disarmed him with efficient brutality. The knife clattered across the asphalt as Tyler hit the ground hard, his expensive shirt tearing on the rough concrete. His companions hesitated, suddenly aware that they were facing someone with actual combat experience rather than a frightened cafe worker. Kate's expression was cold and professional as she evaluated the threats, her hands positioned to strike or defend as needed. "Danny," she said without taking her eyes off Tyler's friends, "go inside and call Sheriff Martinez. Tell her we need police and an ambulance." "I'm okay," Danny said, though his voice was shaking. "The ambulance isn't for you," Kate replied. Tyler was struggling to sit up, blood streaming from his nose where he'd hit the pavement. His friends were backing away, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of real consequences. "You're going to jail for this," Tyler gasped, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "Assault, battery, attacking a minor." Kate smiled without humor. "Self-defense and defense of a minor," she corrected, "against an armed assailant who threatened grievous bodily harm. I've got witnesses, security cameras, and a knife with your fingerprints on it." Sheriff Martinez arrived within minutes, her deputies securing the scene with professional efficiency. She took one look at the situation. Tyler bleeding on the ground, the knife lying nearby, Danny's fresh injuries, and began making arrests. "Tyler Blackwood," she said formally, "you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, terroristic threatening, and assault on a minor." "My father will have your badge," Tyler snarled as the handcuffs clicked into place. "Your father's going to have bigger problems than my badge," Martinez replied coldly. As Tyler and his friends were loaded into police cars, Ranger emerged from the shadows where he'd been watching. Kate wasn't surprised to see him. The nomads had been keeping discreet surveillance on potential flashpoints throughout the town. "Clean work," he said approvingly. "Professional, proportional, justified." Kate was shaking now, adrenaline flooding her system as the immediate danger passed. She'd been in firefights that felt less intense than the past few minutes. "Danny," she said, turning to the boy who was watching the arrests with wide eyes, "are you hurt?" "No," he said, then corrected himself. Not badly. They mostly just pushed me around until Tyler got angry. Kate examined his injuries by the light of the street lamp. Minor bruising, no serious damage, but the psychological impact would take longer to heal. Luis Reeves arrived as the last police car was pulling away, his face a mask of fury and fear as he embraced his son. When he looked at Kate, his eyes were bright with tears. "Thank you," he said simply. "I don't know how to repay." "You don't need to repay anything," Kate interrupted. "Danny's a good kid." Any of us would have done the same, but even as she spoke the words, Kate knew they weren't entirely true. Most people would have called for help, would have stayed safe while others took the risks. She'd chosen to act, to put herself between harm and an innocent child, because that's who she was, who the military had trained her to be. The story spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire. By morning, everyone knew that Tyler Blackwood had been arrested for attacking a military child with a knife, that the quiet cafe worker had disarmed him with military precision, that the privileged son of the town's most powerful family was sitting in jail. Carl Blackwood's response was swift and vicious. By noon, Kate had been fired from Murphy's Cafe, the elderly owner claiming that the incident had made her a liability. Building inspectors appeared at businesses known to support military families, finding sudden violations that required expensive fixes. The pressure was intense and coordinated, designed to isolate Kate and her allies through economic warfare. But something unexpected happened. Instead of retreating in fear, Cedar Falls began to push back. Veterans who had remained silent for years began speaking out. Military spouses shared their own stories of harassment and discrimination. Local business owners, inspired by Kate's courage, publicly declared their support for military families. The city council meeting drew the largest crowd in Cedar Falls history. The small chamber was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds gathering in the parking lot and nearby streets. The nomads were there in force, but they were outnumbered by ordinary citizens who had finally found their voice. Carl Blackwood tried to control the narrative from the beginning, his opening statement painting Kate as an unstable veteran and the bikers as outside agitators threatening the peace of Cedar Falls. But his polished presentation was undercut by the reality of his son's arrest, by the evidence of systematic harassment that Sheriff Martinez had compiled. When Kate took the podium, the room fell silent. She had prepared remarks, but she set them aside and spoke from the heart instead. "My name is Kate Morrison," she began. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan as an army medic. I came to Cedar Falls looking for peace, for a quiet place to rebuild my life after military service." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "What I found instead was a community under siege, not from foreign enemies or natural disasters, but from people who believe that wealth and influence give them the right to determine who belongs and who doesn't." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Danny Reeves is 12 years old. His mother is serving our country in Syria. His father works 60-hour weeks to keep their family afloat. When Tyler Blackwood cornered him with a knife, he was just a scared kid trying to get home safely." The crowd murmured angrily at the reminder of Tyler's attack. Kate pressed on. "But this isn't really about one incident. It's about a pattern of intimidation designed to drive military families out of Cedar Falls. It's about the belief that some citizens are more valuable than others, that service and sacrifice count for nothing when measured against money and political connections." She looked directly at Carl Blackwood, who was glaring at her with undisguised hatred. "Mr. Blackwood, you may own property in this town, but you don't own the people. You don't get to decide who belongs here based on their bank account or their family name." The applause was thunderous, drowning out Carl's attempt to interrupt. When it finally died down, Kate delivered her conclusion. "The nomads came to Cedar Falls because they recognized injustice. They stayed because they believe in protecting those who can't protect themselves. If that makes them dangerous, then I'm dangerous too. Every veteran in this room is dangerous, because we've all sworn an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The implication was clear, and Carl Blackwood's face flushed with rage. He understood that he'd been publicly labelled a domestic enemy of constitutional values. The council meeting lasted until nearly midnight, with speaker after speaker sharing stories of Blackwood family intimidation. Veterans, military spouses, immigrants, small business owners, all testified to a pattern of systematic harassment designed to reshape Cedar Falls according to Carl's vision. When the votes were finally counted, every one of Blackwood's proposals had been defeated. The emergency measures targeting the nomads were rejected. A resolution supporting military families was passed unanimously. Most significantly, the council voted to launch a formal investigation into Blackwood Development's business practices. Carl Blackwood stormed out of the meeting without comment, but his furious expression spoke volumes. This was a defeat he hadn't anticipated, a public humiliation that threatened the foundation of his power. In the parking lot afterward, Kate found herself surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. The attention was overwhelming for someone who had spent years avoiding the spotlight, but there was something deeply moving about seeing the community come together, about witnessing ordinary people find the courage to stand up for what was right. Ranger appeared at her elbow as the crowd began to disperse. "Hell of a speech," he said approvingly. "You might have missed your calling as a politician." Kate laughed, the sound carrying relief and exhaustion in equal measure. "I think I'll stick to serving coffee and protecting kids." "About that," Ranger said, his expression growing serious. "Murphy's Cafe might not be an option anymore, given the pressure Blackwood's applying. But the nomads know some people who might be interested in backing a new establishment, something that couldn't be bought or intimidated." The offer was tempting, but Kate had learned to be cautious about gifts that came with strings attached. "What would you want in return?" "Nothing more than what you've already given," Ranger replied. "Courage when it mattered, a willingness to stand up for what's right, the knowledge that there's at least one place in Cedar Falls where justice matters more than money." 3 weeks later, Kate's place opened in a renovated garage on the outskirts of town. The location was less convenient than Murphy's Cafe had been, but the customers followed her anyway. Veterans, military families, and locals who appreciated her stand against intimidation made the small restaurant a gathering place for those who believed in community over wealth. The nomads kept their promise, providing silent security and steady patronage without trying to control Kate's decisions. Their presence reminded potential troublemakers that Kate Morrison was under protection, that threatening her would have consequences extending far beyond Cedar Falls. Tyler Blackwood eventually pleaded guilty to assault charges, receiving probation and community service in exchange for his cooperation in the investigation of his father's business practices. The experience seemed to have shaken something loose in the young man, whether wisdom or merely fear remained to be seen. Carl Blackwood's empire began to crumble under scrutiny. The investigation revealed years of illegal practices, from bribery to tax evasion to intimidation of public officials. Federal charges were filed, and the man who had once seemed untouchable found himself facing prison time. Sheriff Martinez was elected mayor in the following election, running on a platform of equal justice and community support. Her first official act was to establish a Veterans Affairs office, ensuring that military families would have an advocate within the city government. Danny Reeves thrived in the new environment, his confidence returning as the harassment ended and his family's place in the community was secured. His mother returned from deployment to find a town that welcomed her service rather than resenting it. 6 months after the confrontation behind Murphy's Cafe, Kate stood on the porch of her restaurant, watching the desert sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The peace she'd been seeking when she came to Cedar Falls had finally found her, built on the foundation of standing up for what was right rather than hiding from what was wrong. Ranger approached from the parking lot, his daily coffee break having become a comfortable routine. At 72, he was considering retirement from the road, but his commitment to justice remained undiminished. "Any regrets?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. Kate considered the question seriously. The past months had transformed her life in ways she never could have anticipated. She'd gone from anonymous cafe worker to community leader, from someone running from her past to someone embracing her purpose. "No regrets," she said finally. "Sometimes the battles choose us, whether we want them or not." Ranger nodded in understanding. The important thing is being ready when they do. As the stars began to appear in the clear desert sky, Kate thought about the long road that had brought her here. From the battlefields of Afghanistan to a small-town cafe, from protecting wounded soldiers to defending a frightened child, the thread had always been the same: the willingness to stand between harm and those who couldn't protect themselves. It wasn't the quiet retirement she'd planned, but it was something better, a purpose that honored her service while building something new. In the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.